Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters, and we are very honored to have with us today Paul Jacob, Global Affairs Analyst, as I like to call him. Not global, and he's not having global affairs. He's a Global Affairs Analyst. I have to clarify that because his wife wants me to make sure I clarify that. So welcome, Paul, to the show.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you.
So do you actually, when I say good morning Vietnam, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about. Of course, Robin Williams, classic movie, good movie. But we were the good guys in that movie, and I'm not sure that in the parks and streets of Vietnam that we're the good guys. Although, they sort of like us better having met their neighbor to the north.
Well, we're going to talk about that. So, our segment today, in case you didn't read the fine print, is not just about foreign policy. It's about the self-destruction of America and Trump's policies. I'm not going to blame it all on Trump. We're going to talk about it. But before we get started, I want to tell you this. Do you remember John Matsusaka, our friend from USC?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
John, who's just been anti getting involved politically in anything, is now running for, and I probably shouldn't say it publicly, but he's running for a president of the faculty senate in USC because he says things are so much is going on that he really has to take a stand. So, John, if you're watching, good luck, and I hope it all works out. So let's start with where to start. Let's start. I have a question for you. So this American, well, the guy from Ecuador, I believe, or El Salvador, who I can't remember his name, who was allowed in the United States because he was going to be murdered in his home country. He accidentally was shipped back a couple of weeks ago. The U.S. Supreme Court said America has to bring him back, but Trump and the president of El Salvador said, tough luck, we're not bringing him back. So what do you make of that? Let's start with that.
Well, I think actually this is extremely important because there's a lot of, oh, Trump's doing this, he's a dictator, he's this and this. And my encouragement to everyone is always that gets lost in all the other, oh my goodness, Trump, Trump, Trump. Focus on policies, focus on actual facts and circumstances and happenings. And no matter where you stand on deportations, on the broader policy, there's a thing called due process. And that's not just something that is there for citizens, it's there for any human being on the planet who finds themselves in America. There is due process. Now you may not supposed to be here, and maybe they're gonna deport you. There has to be due process. That's what it's all about. And if we give that up, everything's gone. Everything's gone. So this is really, really important. And it's important that folks look at this and realize, look, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. This can't go on. And it's not about this guy in El Salvador. I mean, I've seen different reports. I've read different things that he's MS-13. No, he's not. He is. He's not. It doesn't matter. Give him due process, because if he doesn't get due process, the dream of America is over. And so this is very, very serious.
Well, I'm glad we're starting with this because it is. It's about, even if you love Donald Trump, if you want to marry Donald Trump and be his 50th wife, similar to me having 50 wives, but you still have to understand that the rule of law is critical. You look what's happening in Hungary, look what's happening in China, you look what's happening in other parts of Southeast Asia, look what's happening in Russia. The difference between freedom and democracy and authoritarianism is the rule of law. Okay, it is.
Yes.
And one of those key things is due process. So you're right. They're rounding up people. Listen, I want us to be a country of legal immigration. I do. But when you just really round people up, ship them off, and I was, not to belabor this point because I really get caught on this one, but I was reading some of the transcripts about what's happening in court where before the federal judge is asking the U.S. Department of Justice attorneys, like, where is this guy? They say, oh, we don't know. How can you just ignore answering a question from a federal judge? It's just crazy. Anyway, so due process, that's number one. So let's go on to the next thing. Let me just ask you this question, Paul. Do you believe America is self-destructing?
Well, let's realize America's 300 some odd million separate individual people. It's an idea. It's a landmass. Uh, we have politically been in the process of self-destructing. Uh, you could argue our whole existence, but I think actually for much of our existence we were building and getting better, and in all kinds of ways we get better today. But politically, we're in a very tough spot. And I think part of it is the world around us. We have authoritarianism on the march, and we really. I look back and I think these alliances we've had in Asia and in Europe that I've always been fairly skeptical of. Like, why are we pouring all our money in over there? These have worked extremely well. And we find ourselves at a point where in the US, there's always been this Europe doesn't pull their weight. But I confront a reality now where we need Europe. At one point, America was the superpower, and I've always hated that term because I think it's not accurate. There are no superpowers. They're bigger and stronger sometimes, but it's not a superpower. And so I look at America and I think, we have been the country that's going to do everything everywhere, police the entire world. We've gotten to a point where we have enemies to where we can't do that. And I think there's a lot of support for Donald Trump, shaking things up in the U.S. and this idea that somehow foreign countries have taken advantage of us. Certainly politicians have taken advantage of us, but not foreign countries so much. And I see that we really need the rest of the world in a way that 20, 30 years ago we did not. And that's the realization I think people need to come to, that this is a much smaller world. We need Europe and Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Taiwan. We need all these people pulling together, and it seems like they are, only we've kind of decided we don't need them, and we do need them.
Well, let me ask this. So, listen, you're the only American friend I have who's willing to get up at the crack of dawn and have these conversations. So I appreciate that. So, come back to foreign policy. So here's the key question. From America, dealing specifically within the 48 contiguous or 50 states, however you want to define it,
56.
Trump's policy. 56 states?
Years ago, Obama flubbed and said 56, and it was repeated many times. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I must
I'm
have
living
missed
in
that
the
on
past.
my geography class. But so Trump's policies, let's go through some of them. So immigration, yeah. But let me just ask you this question. What is the number one thing domestically, let's talk about domestically, of Trump's policies that's concerning you the most, and that should concern Americans the most, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, let's just step back. I think it's very tough to look at that and say, here's what should concern us the most. I'm more focused on foreign policy, so that's what concerns me the most. And of course, there's some good things that have come out. This leaked memo that says, hey, we're going to put Taiwan defense first, which I think strategically makes a lot of sense. From a domestic standpoint, the biggest thing we're hearing right now is deportations and getting a handle on the border. And of course, the moment Trump comes in, the expectations have changed a lot. And so the border is less of a problem now. But the real issue, I think, is there's a lot of chaos. The things have happened so quickly that I think it's very tough, even for the media that has always wanted to hold Donald Trump to account and cover every move he's making. I think it's been very tough for folks. And so you've got these tariffs, which kind of come out of left field for most folks, because most of our history, recent history, nobody's talking tariffs. That's a thing of the 1930s and before, and that's got the entire world roiled in controversy, and oh my goodness. So this is life in America, and I think maybe in a lot of the world. It's chaotic. I think people want, obviously, costs to come down, inflation to be stopped, but all of a sudden we're off on a roller coaster ride. So I think if you were to say what issue is American are Americans focused on? I think it's figuring out the chaos.
Okay, so chaos. I do a lot of foreign policy stuff, as you know, as well. And one of the things that we talk about is that keeping the opposition guessing what you're doing. Okay, so chaos sometimes can be your friend. But putting that aside for a second, let's talk about. I'm going to go back to immigration for a second. Listen, my great grandparents, they came here from Scotland and Ireland. Well, they didn't come here to Vietnam. They went there to the United States from Scotland and Ireland. They're here. I just trying to find their graves. So. But and for our international audience, I mean, this is very important, especially for Nigerians. There are a lot of Nigerians in America, and the problem you have is that if you have a visa, if you have a green card, and I have friends who actually are naturalized U.S. citizens, everyone is scared to death about whether to travel, either into the country or out of the country. Now, that is problematic on many levels. Students, I'm gonna get to education here in a second. Students who can't go home and visit friends are afraid to leave. No telling what may happen if they try to come back in. Let me ask you, here's a question for you. So I read an article today about one of the reasons that they're now trying to take $2.2 billion from Harvard is because Harvard was allowing anti-Semitism to grow on the campuses. Now, I do a lot of work in the Middle East. To me, if you're having a protest in support of the Palestinians, that does not mean you're anti-Semitic, does it? Does it mean you're anti-Semitic?
No, of course it wouldn't. And one of the interesting things about there's all kinds of grounds to deport folks. It is amazing that the Congress has given the president, if he doesn't like the way you look almost, he can deport you. The one reason you can't deport somebody is because they came to America and they accepted America's gift to the world, free speech, and they used it. You can be deported for almost anything under the law, but not for using your speech, as any person in America has a right to do. And so it's the worst thing to go after these folks and claiming anti-Semitism. Look, if you harassed someone, you intimidated someone, you committed a crime, whether it was charged or whether it was seen and not charged, and now you're going to be deported. Okay, that's the way it works. But you said something at a protest, that's absolutely protected. You have an opinion that Israel's 100% wrong, then state your opinion. That's America. And I think there are some folks who say, well, but these people, they don't really have a right to be here. Well, they're here lawfully and they have every right to speak. That's America. And if we start going after, obviously, we're not going to go after the richest, most popular people in the world. We're going to go after people who said something that, hey, we don't like that. Saying something that folks don't like, welcome to America. So this is a very serious aspect of it, because Trump has a number of policies that I don't think you can assail the policy, but it doesn't mean that it's okay to do it any way you like. You have to follow the rules. You have to follow due process. That's what freedom is. It's not, oh, we never make a mistake. It's that we have a process whereby if you get swept up in something and you're innocent, you have your day in court. And that's what's been denied here. It's a much bigger case than simply, hey, what are the rules of deportation? You can't go after people for using their freedom. Case closed.
Well, let me ask you. Well, here's an interesting question, because I never really thought about it. Free speech and the protection of freedom of speech guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution, is that only a protection to American citizens, or is it a protection to anyone who is on American soil?
It's a protection for anyone who is on American soil. And there have been several, I'm not an attorney and I won't be able to cite the cases, but it has come up and stuff I've read recently. The courts have said, yes, if you're on American soil and you're not a citizen, in fact, if you're on American soil and you don't belong, according to what the law enforcement agencies are saying, you don't belong here and they're going to deport you, there's a process. There is due legal process that you are afforded, even if you're here illegally, much less if you're here legally. So Yes, these rights, the right to assemble, the right to free speech, the right to be free from outrageous searches and seizures, all of those rights are for anybody. Now, they may not have the right to be here. That's different. But if they're here, they have the right to be free.
Well, so let's talk about for our Nigerian friends that are listening to the show. You know, if you're Nigerian and you're in the United States legally, because I've talked to several and they're afraid to even leave their apartment. Some of them are even afraid to walk
Yes,
out of their house, even though they're here legally. Not here, once again.
right.
I gotta remember, I'm not here. They're not here legally in Vietnam. They're legally there in the United States.
Next time we're all flying to Vietnam to be with you, Dane.
I appreciate that.
You'll be
So,
somewhere
but
else then.
I will definitely. I can't be in the same country as you. But if you're a Nigerian and you're in America, you know, and you're not an attorney, we're not giving legal advice, all those disclaimers that I have to make, you know, I agree with you. You should be able to enjoy the rights of America if you're there legally, right?
Yes.
You should be able to speak freely against something that you don't believe in. So if you're a Nigerian going to school in the United States, let me just tell you, you know, I know it's scary, but speak up, you know, because what we see around the world, and I think going back to the Hitler days, to correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that diminishing speech, scaring somebody from speaking. That's how authoritarians gain power and control, by silencing speech. And that's my concern about America, is that I'm not saying Donald Trump's an authoritarian. I'm not, you know, but I'm saying that as a country, if we start silencing speech, that's the same as burning books, in my opinion. You know, we're heading in a direction that is scary. So,
And it's
uh,
not just up to Donald Trump not to do it. Whether he's an authoritarian or not, we may find out in the end. But I think that there are a lot of people who, if they're held to account, don't become authoritarian in whatever way, shape, or form. And so it's critical that we hold him to account. And in the same way that he's gotten a positive in that there are less border crossings and so on because he sent a message that that's not going to be so good to come over the border illegally. He also has sent a message that's not good, that says America is not a safe place to travel to right now, and that's destructive. I think the risk of someone coming to America and being deported to El Salvador is really, really, really small. But it's a risk now that someone has to think about. And that reputation of America, and as someone who has not traveled a whole lot in his short life, but has traveled more, you always hear that, oh, they don't like us, you know, they don't like Americans in Europe and they don't like Americans here and so on. People around the world like Americans, not every single human being, but they like the freedom that we have. They want what we have. And that's wonderful because what we have is some great stuff, freedom, prosperity that comes with freedom. And so sending that message to people, one of the best things we have going for us is that all over the world, I think people are waking up to the fact that authoritarianism is on the march, and they look to the U.S. That needs to not be backhanded, and we don't want to send a message that no, this great dream of America, that freedom could be sea to shining sea, and then all over the world. Let's not truncate that dream.
well, listen, and I only have 2 minutes here left, so let's talk about this, because one of the things that concerns me, you know, and the reason I want to talk about is America self-destructing, is because the message that's being sent to the young people around the world, whether you're in Nigeria, whether you're in Vietnam, whether you're in Cambodia, whether you're in Peru, wherever it is, you know, I travel the world, and you know, I meet with a lot of young people, and it's exactly what you say. They look to America for guidance. Okay, they look for America about how their country should be. And when you live in a world now where the young people, what they're hearing from the, forget, there are superpowers, by the way, Batman and or whatever, Superman have superpowers, so they do exist. It's not, you know, it's like saying the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus doesn't exist. But
Right.
But when you talk about that, when Donald Trump talks about, hey, there is no freedom of speech, or there is, or trying to literally blackmail universities. I use that term intentionally to do what he wants, where he blackmails law firms to do what he wants. When he uses that heavy-handedness, does it concern you what message this is sending to the world and to the youth of the world?
Well, the message always concerns me. And in some of those cases, I might say, wait a second, some of these universities need to be held to account. It's like a lot of people, they look at DOGE, what is it, Department of Government Efficiency, misnomer. They look at that and they say, well, this is great. They're getting a handle on things. And again, there's a certain amount of creative destruction that I think the public will go along with. But it has to be something that's within the laws. It has to be something that, like this situation in El Salvador, where you've sent somebody and the court says, hey, you shouldn't have sent them, and there's a real question about whether you didn't disobey a judge's order going into it. That's tyranny. That's not using your powers as president. So I think we have to be very careful. I think we are right to be very concerned about how the world views us, in large part because the world is a very small place and because we are headed into some tremendous headwinds. Look, there's a war in Europe. There is a war in Europe. There is war in the Middle East, and there is constant bullying and the prelude to war in Asia. We have to have our together. and so and so
Well,
that's that sort of veering off and sending the wrong message to the world. We can't afford it because we need the rest of the world and they need us.
no, no, I know, and it does concern me because here in Vietnam, where I've really been talking to a lot of young people here. First of all, they aren't happy because of the whole tariff situation,
Right.
and then in Taiwan, I was talking to Michael Cow, our mutual friend Michael Cow, who says that 70% of small businesses in Taiwan are now in jeopardy because of the tariffs there, and all that kind of stuff. But putting the economics aside for a second, it does really scare me to death when I talk to young people and they say, oh, when I'm future president of my country, or I'm the future prime minister of my country, or I'm the future senator of my country, or the mayor of this big city of Ho Chi Minh, it's okay for me to act in ways that are tyrannical, like Tyrannosaurus Rex, or it's okay. And to me, when I talk about America self-destructing, when America self-destructs, the world self-destructs. There's a guy who told me, and I know I got to get off here. There's a guy who told me that when America sneezes, the world listens, and that's true. So when America violates due process, when America violates the rule of law, then the world listens. Listen, Paul, sadly, I have to go because we could talk forever. I appreciate being on the show and waking up early like you always do. So anyway, you're a great American, you're a great friend, and I really